Everybody. That is not how I got back to my hotel room last night, but it may be tonight. There's actually a reason why I showed that video this morning. I think sometimes the simplest problems are often the most difficult ones to solve. And I actually feel like that video perfectly depicts how I feel as a designer most of the time. Thankfully, we're never alone in what we do. There are people that are always there to help us, quite literally, in fact. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that this morning and a few other things as well. When I was approached to give this talk, I had a difficult time figuring out what I wanted to share with you. There were stories of past projects. There was the origin story of Teehan and Lax. There were stories about our process. I started a few of them, and ultimately I scrapped them all. They felt a little bit self-serving and, quite frankly, a bit uninteresting. So instead, I'm going to share with you some of what I've learned over the years in this industry. It's real stuff, and I think it's important. I think some of you will probably find it quite obvious, and other things inside of this you may simply just not relate to. I think my hope is that you'll all be able to walk away with one thing that'll help you in your job or in your life. And my real goal here would be that you can take that one thing away and help others around you. If you're wondering why the title slide is untitled, it's because I honestly couldn't think of anything clever or witty or articulate or even good to call this presentation, which leads me to my first point, and that's attending to what matters. I left it blank because I just wanted to start to work on the meat of the presentation. The contents are obviously what was most important here. It's the same reason I didn't spend time sourcing photos for a fancy deck or creating elaborate transitions. Attending to what matters is a huge part of our job. And I think I've gotten a little bit better at it over the years, but there are still plenty of occasions where I will focus on the wrong thing. It usually happens when we're faced with something that we really want to do and something that we really need to do. It's really easy, obviously, to choose to work and focus on the things that you want to do. When I find myself in that position, I try to ask myself what's important right now. Is it something that I want to do, or is it something that I need to do? And when I realize there's something less interesting that needs tending to, I use that when completed, I use the thing that I really want to do as a reward for completing the things that maybe I don't want to do. This is John Lax and I. We've worked together for a long time, coming on, I think, about 15 years now. He and I met at a digital agency back in the late 90s. Eventually, the company we worked for closed, and it's a pretty self-indulgent story that I won't bore you with, but long story short, we thought maybe there would be a better way to do digital work, and so we started Teehan Lax in 2002, and we've been doing it ever since. We've obviously, over that time frame, worked on a lot of stuff together, learning through a few successes and a whole whack of failures. And I think if we were to write a book that only had 2 chapters, one what to do and one what not to do, the one not to do would be a little bit thicker. The work we do now is obviously a lot different than what we did back then, vastly different, in fact, and it's changed a lot, and thankfully most of it for the better. Do you guys remember some of the first projects that you did, maybe even stuff from just a few years ago? And remember how good you thought they were? But now when you look back at them, some of it makes you cringe. Well, I think that's mostly because a lot of our industry follows trends and styles. And obviously those trends and styles will go out of style. Advancement in technology also plays a part here. But there are examples of work that they seemingly last a test of time. And I think with those projects, why they last longer is because they're not relying on the styles themselves to hold the work together. Instead, they're held together by a design system or an aesthetic that's only there to support the interactions that help people do the thing that they're there to do or feel the way you want them to feel. I try to remind myself of this when I work in design. And some good questions that I ask myself in that process are, am I relying too much on what's happening right now? Do the styles help or hinder what somebody's trying to accomplish? And am I relying too heavily on what's already been done in the past? It's a really hard thing to assess. Unfortunately, perspective is really hard to get back sometimes, and sometimes it's only available to you through time. Next month marks the 12th anniversary of Teehan Lax, and during that period, we've worked on almost 600 projects. We're really fortunate that a lot of people have trusted us with their business. Doing a huge body of work is obviously one of the best things we can do to get better at our craft. Surrounding ourselves with talented people doesn't hurt either. But looking back at our work can help us improve too. It can help us avoid the pitfalls that we've fell into the past. There is a tremendous amount of fluctuation in how we feel during the design process. It's really easy to get down on your work. Positive feedback and collaboration can help combat that, but when somebody's really having a hard time, we need to look to giving that problem to another team member. It's not something that we want to do all the time. We want to give people an opportunity to work through the problem and solve it. But sometimes you know in your gut that the work that's being done isn't the best. On a recent project called Prismatic, one of the designers was spinning on something. I don't even remember what it was. I think it was like a commenting system. And it wasn't that the work was bad. We just knew it could be better. So when we recognized that this person was spinning, we got together, we huddled around, we talked about a few ideas, and we ended up shifting off that problem to somebody else. And I think they only probably worked on it for a couple of hours, and they handed it back to that person. And the small tweaks and changes gave that person new perspective on what they were doing. So that incremental improvement actually gave them new perspective. It was a bit like layer tennis, and it worked great. I don't think we really have any hard or fast rules for when we do that. I think the most important thing is when you do it, it has to be done without a tone of failure. It needs to be done with a feeling of being a team. I think we are not, good work doesn't happen with just in this lone wolf mentality. We need to act as a team. And I think creating a culture where people don't feel deflated or like they're getting their toes stepped on is very important, very healthy, and very necessary. There are other feelings of highs and lows in what we do. And those of you who work in a services shop or are freelancers will probably be able to relate to this very well. And it's about letting go. Show of hands here with how many people are parents, or soon to be. I know there's a few. Well, here's how I like to think about it. If we work for a company that's focused on one product, we kind of act like parents to our product, right? We bring them into the world. We teach them how to do some wonderful things. When they fall, we're there to pick them back up. We brush them off, and we send them back out into the world. If you're one of the many people who works at a services company like me, then we're in the same boat. For us, we act more like surrogates or foster parents. We only get a very small period of time to work on these products, to work with our children. Maybe we help birth them. Maybe we help them teach them something new. But eventually, we have to leave. Letting go is simply part of our job, and sometimes it's very, very, very difficult. But ultimately, we do it because it's what's best for the child. It's what's best for the product. Put another way, our job is literally to work ourselves out of a job. I'll use our work on Medium as an example. We came in to help them prototype and ultimately launch Medium.com. And after working on it for about 8 months, Evan Williams and I sat down and we tried to figure out a way we could continue to work together. And we couldn't. We knew that the best thing for the product was for us to leave. And so that's what we did. It was very difficult to leave that project. I think in our business there's a tendency to see the variety of work as a huge blessing, and it is, but it also has its drawbacks. There are projects that sometimes we just don't want to give back. I think everybody in this room should be doing one great thing each and every year for our community, for our industry. I don't think we should be waiting for people to ask for help. I think we need to give it. I think we need to share more. I think we need to give more. So share your code, share your knowledge, share your tools, your thoughts, and your opinions. But most importantly, when you do it without asking for anything in return. I promise you, if you do, you'll get more value. It'll be far more beneficial for you. You'll get more in return than you can imagine. Not everything in life that we do needs to be for profit. Sometimes we profit in other ways, through recognition and reputation. We created a tool back in 2008 after a pitch. We got a lot of use out of it internally, and we thought maybe other people would too. Maybe even some of you have. It turns out that a lot of people got use out of it. It got downloaded a lot, millions and millions of times. And it even helped me get a response from Steve Jobs when I asked him a question about an upcoming WWDC event. This is an industry that has given us a whole hell of a lot. It's provided us with what I think are some of the best jobs on the planet. And we need to give back to it. That initial file just took a day or two to produce, and it does every year when they update the OS. And we probably could have made a decent profit from it. But we choose not to, because it pays us back in more meaningful ways that grow our business. And it's about building reputation. While obviously I'd prefer not to be known for the guy who did the iPhone template thing, it doesn't really bother me that most of the times we are. It's helped us meet a lot of really great people. Reputation is the primary way we think about new business at Teehan and Lax. We've hired people in the past to help us, but time and time again we found that it was our reputation and the relationships we built as a result of that reputation that ultimately create the deal flow that keeps our business going. Growing and keeping that reputation is the single most important factor to our business. It's why we do things like the PSD. It's why we share our code. It's why we blog, and it's why we travel to events like this. It's a ton of work, and it all needs to be done in between the actual work. So how does doing stuff for the community help? help you. A couple years ago, we had this theory that maybe our peers were our clients. We wanted to work on really awesome stuff. So we thought about who these people were, and most of the products had founders and CEOs that valued design a great deal. They also had design teams and engineering teams. So we figured if we targeted what we do from a messaging and marketing perspective at them, instead of some fictional person or role that doesn't exist, that maybe we'd attract more of the work that we actually want to be doing. So we started talking and doing things differently. It was really easy to know what to say because we knew what we wanted to hear. Case studies that broke down into problems, solutions, and results were fluffed up and fake. As designers, we wanted more genuine and truthful stories. We wanted stories of failure. We wanted to see the stuff behind the stuff, the prototypes, the failed attempts. We wanted to learn from them. So that's what we did. We wrote for ourselves. We created and shared tools for ourselves. We shared the trials and tribulations of our work, even if it wasn't that great. We don't talk generically about what we do. We put it in context of actual projects. We just built stuff that we wanted to read ourselves. So did it work? Did it help us? It's really difficult for us to measure. We try really hard. But I think when we look at it at a macro view, it has helped. I know today we're doing better work and getting better opportunities than we did a few years ago before we started speaking a little bit more honestly. But there's another thing that helps us, and it's just simply doing good work. Ultimately, that reputation needs to be built upon doing great work. It's that simple. I think there's a part of our industry that focuses too much on things outside the work purely to build reputation. Don't get me wrong, I think it's really important that we blog, that we tweet, or whatever. You know, going to conferences like this and meeting people is awesome too. But nothing backs up that stuff like great work. I'm sure you all know this, but the more great work you do, the more great work you'll get. And for some, that may come easy, but for us, I can tell you, it is a constant uphill battle. In the early to mid-2000s, there weren't a lot of clients building useful stuff on the web. There was a lot of marketing sites, microsites, banner advertisements. We did them. But we wanted to be doing different kinds of work. We wanted to be building utility. And so we found this little sweet spot with financial services. They were the ones that wanted to create useful utilities for their tools, their advisors, their clients. They also had really good budgets. So they allowed us to cut our teeth in some product design. We started by building like a mutual fund site, allowed you to trade and track, your portfolio. It was fairly complex stuff at the time, which would probably feel pretty rudimentary today. But when we took that to market, it got more work like that. My point being, you tend to get more of the stuff that you put in market, so put good stuff in market. Good work is hard to find. It's also really hard to assess. It gets clouded by really bad briefs. It gets clouded by not asking the right questions. And it gets clouded by money. So when I ask what good work is, what I'm referring to is what makes a good project. How do we know when to take something on? How do we know when to say no? Even if you only have one opportunity in front of you, you still have a choice. The answer doesn't always need to be yes. There are opportunity costs also when you say yes. We've made some bad choices in the past. Most of those choices revolve around doing stuff for money, and that sucks. Taking on projects without caring about what you're working on, or who you're working with, or what the problem space is, or if you're interested in it, is a huge risk for you and for your business. Understanding fit is one of the most important things when assessing a project and whether or not you should work on it. So how do we know what's good? Well, here's one way we like to think about it. Are you going to be working with good, smart people who are present and who are caring? Do you genuinely like the product you're going to be working on? Is the problem set interesting to you? Do you feel the organization is open to change? Is the product really broken? And if it is, how much change are they willing to accept? Can you make money? The balance and ratios of these things can change. You're never going to find a project that has perfect balance. But sometimes you're going to make a little less money, but you'll get to work on something great, and vice versa. But understand, if one of these factors approaches zero, then you're potentially choosing a bad project to work on. A project balance that looks like this is a bad fit. So be honest with yourself. There are always trade-offs when you're working on a project. And if you do take on a job primarily for profit, don't try and convince yourself it's for other reasons. It's only going to become an enabler in the future for you to do it again and again. If you do decide to take it on, hopefully it's a rare exception, though ideally you can avoid it altogether. And sometimes it is unavoidable. Sometimes you don't have a great deal of choice. Other times you misassess whether or not a job is a good fit. It's very easy to get sold a bag of hammers in this industry. When that happens, you just need to make the best of it. Do the best you can, put something as good as you can in market, and learn from it, and ask yourself what you didn't see. Money can be like a drug, and you really don't want yourself chasing projects simply for the dollars, because your work is going to suck. Most importantly, people are going to leave. It's very difficult work to bring in great projects to a team, but it's a big part of what keeps them happy. And if there is one thing I've learned, a happy team tends to be less promiscuous. The people in our company, the people that we work with, are our greatest asset, so we need to act accordingly. For those of you who don't get a say in what you work on, you're not powerless either. If bad projects keep coming in, there's a problem with how that company assesses fit. Or your values don't align. If it keeps happening, you still have a choice too. You can speak to someone. You can leave. You can find a company whose values do align. But for God's sake, don't do nothing. You're going to find yourself in a terribly ugly place, and one that's going to be very difficult to get out of if left unchanged. You need to say no to projects that don't fit. It's going to be scary, and not just the first time. It still scares the shit out of me every time I say no to a project, especially when we're light on work. Even after more than a decade, I can stand here and honestly say I have no idea what we're working on in 6 to 8 weeks. I don't know how we're paying people, and that's only like late October. That's not that far from now. But I do understand that if I don't say no to some things, that I'm going to end up taking on those bad things and possibly having to say no to really great things. And I don't know why it works this way, but it has for a long time, since our inception, that good things seem to happen when we turn down bad things. If I ever figure out why, I'm going to write my first book. No is a very powerful word, but it doesn't always need to be thought of as being negative, especially in the context of working on a product. It enables us to make great things with great velocity. It focuses us, and it simplifies the things that we're working on. It takes a great deal of perspective and courage to kill really good ideas that are polished and built and maybe even in market. But in the end, if you don't make difficult cuts, if you don't say no to the right things, your product is going to become complex, and it's going to lack direction. If you say it at the wrong time, in the wrong way, it will undoubtedly destroy whatever it is you're trying to create. It's a very difficult skill to learn and impossible to master, and I think it just comes with time, repetition, and plenty of mistakes. But it is what great product design is all about. There always seems to be a ton of focus on empathy in our industry, and I think it is an incredibly important aspect of it. And to me, it's part of something a little bit larger that we need to have when we're creating whatever it is we're creating. How many of you have ever stared at your work so long that you barely even know what you're looking at? You begin only to see the details, the pixels, the images, the words. You can't see it in a more holistic way any longer. You've lost perspective. Empathy, I think, is just one of the things that gives us perspective on the work that we're doing. Past experiences, insights gathered from data, research, logical thinking, collaboration. These are things that inform good design decisions. Stepping away from the work when we lose that perspective certainly helps, but again, sometimes that takes a very long time to regain. The ability to have it is one of the most valuable assets and traits we can have as designers. What's great is it isn't all on us, right? There are people sitting next to us. It could be an engineer sitting across from you. It could be a client 1,000 miles away. All these people can help bring perspective, even friends, colleagues, family, end users, whomever. Whatever you can do to try and gain new perspective is really important.
Nobody tells people who are beginners, and I really wish somebody had told this to me, is that all of us who do creative work, like, you know, we get into it, and we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's a gap, that for the first couple of years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good, okay? It's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. You know what I mean? A lot of people never get past that phase. A lot of people at that point, they quit. And the thing I would just like say to you with all my heart is that most everybody I know who does interesting creative work, they went through a phase of years where they had really good taste, they could tell what they were making wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. They knew it felt short. It didn't have this special thing that we wanted it to have. And the thing I would say to you is everybody goes through that. And for you to go through it, if you're going through it right now, if you're just getting out of that phase, you got to know it's totally normal. And the most important possible thing you could do is do a lot of work. Do a huge volume of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week or every month you know you're going to finish one story. Because it's only by actually going through a volume of work that you're actually going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions. It takes a while. It's going to take you a while. It's normal to take a while, and you just have to fight your way through that. Okay?
That is an excerpt from a talk that Ira Glass gave. And obviously he's referring to writing and storytelling, but I think the point he makes easily leaps into what we do. What he focuses on in that clip primarily is our work as individuals. And that as individuals we need to do a huge body of work before we can get truly good at something. And I think obviously that's true. I think the only thing I'd really want to stress and add to that, and I think this is a very important point, is that the reality of doing great design work is that it's rarely, if ever, done in isolation. We get better not by doing lots of stuff in isolation, but by collaborating with the people around us. It's important to have time to do your own thing, of course, but you can't always solve something the best way possible on your own. And in order to reduce the risk of bad decisions, we need to look to each other, not ourselves, to push for the best answers. I think we're incredibly fortunate to get to work with the people that we do. Our colleagues and our clients are all included here. I used to work at a place before Teehan Lax where it was common and seemingly acceptable to bitch about people. Thankfully, I don't see it as much anymore, but it still happens. There's a guy named Jason Oak who now works at an agency in Hong Kong who wrote an article back in 2007 after he and some colleagues caught themselves bitching about a client. And he gave some reasons why he thought it was so unhealthy. First of all, it's really negative, and negativity just tends to breed more negativity. I don't want to say things behind someone's back that I wouldn't want to say to their face. It's a very small industry, and sooner or later, those things you say will bite you in the ass. And by focusing on the frustrating parts rather than the good parts, you're setting the stage for more frustration. It makes us stop and see these other people not as people. Everyone on this planet has their own set of pressures, their own fears, their own perspectives, and their own ideas. And we're not always privy to why, but we still need to respect them. It also sets up this us versus them dynamic, instead of one where we work together to help solve a problem. It's also a cop-out. If someone didn't like your idea, guess whose responsibility it is to find another way to explain it? Or to figure out maybe where the lack of understanding lies. Or maybe the idea just wasn't that good to begin with. Every person that I've ever complained about, I've also learned something very important from. Even if what I learned is how to deal with somebody difficult. Lastly, because even the frustrating ones are paying our salaries. The next time I think you hear somebody start to bitch about somebody else, stop them and maybe remind them of a few of these reasons. We need to accept some uncertainty in this industry too. There are going to be tough times. You will lose big clients. You will lose talented colleagues that you love to work with. You won't always produce amazing work. But recognize that sometimes these things can be a blessing, a chance to refocus, and a chance to help us get new perspective. We are living in what I consider to be the golden era of design. If you're talented, if you're nice, if you're persistent and a little bit lucky, you can work directly with the people who are changing the world we live in. In rare instances, you have an opportunity to actually be one of these people. Stop, breathe, and recognize that this is the most amazing time to be a designer. One where you can literally work directly with people like Evan Williams, like Mark Zuckerberg, and a host of others who are intimately involved in design and the products that are shaping the world around us. If you're doing your own thing or working for others, don't think bigger is always better. I've always and still always enjoy small teams over large ones. And even though we're a bigger company now, we really don't make a great deal more money than we did in the past. There are times where there's a lot of fluctuation in our business, and when you're flush, it's never as good as it seems. And when you're down, you feel like you'll never be up again. You always need to keep perspective on what's actually important. My partner is an end-of-life caregiver, and she's seen hundreds of people pass. And it seems that people, when they're about to die, like to share. And never once has any one of her patients ever stated a regret that has anything to do with money or things. They regret the relationships that they didn't foster. They regret not seeing the world. They regret staying in a life that revolved around money or convenience rather than one they love or that they're passionate about. So be kind, be humble, realize that you're never going to do the best work without those sitting next to you. Love your work. Love the people you work with.
What do you desire? What makes you itch? What sort of a situation would you like? Let's suppose, I do this often in vocational guidance of students. They come to me and say, well, we're getting out of college and we haven't the faintest idea what we want to do. So I always ask the question, what would you like to do if money were no object? How would you really enjoy spending your life? Well, it's so amazing. As a result of our kind of educational system, crowds of students say, well, we'd like to be painters, we'd like to be poets, we'd like to be writers, but as everybody knows, you can't earn any money that way. Or another person says, well, I'd like to live an out-of-doors life and ride horses. I say, do you want to teach in a riding school? Let's go through with it. What do you want to do? When we finally got down to something which the individual says he really wants to do, I will say to him, you do that. And forget the money. Because if you say that getting the money is the most important thing, you will spend your life completely wasting your time. You'll be doing things you don't like doing in order to go on living, that is, to go on doing things you don't like doing, which is stupid. Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way. And after all, if you do really like what you're doing, it doesn't matter what it is, you can eventually turn it, you could eventually become a master of it. It's the only way to become a master of something, to be really with it. And then you'll be able to get a good fee for whatever it is. So don't worry too much. Somebody's interested in everything. And anything you can be interested in, you'll find others who are. But it's absolutely stupid to spend your time doing things you don't like in order to go on spending things you don't like, and doing things you don't like, and to teach your children to follow in the same track. See, what we're doing is we're bringing up children and educating them to live the same sort of lives we're living, in order that they may justify themselves and find satisfaction in life by bringing up their children, to bring up their children to do the same thing, so it's all wretch and no vomit. It never gets there. And so, therefore, it's so important to consider this question. What do I desire?
So you need to figure out what you want to do, and you have to start doing it. And don't focus on the end game, and just enjoy the dance. Thank you.